where we're talking all about Jira for executives. So let me pull up my slides here. And this one is actually quite interesting because normally, as I dive into these, I talk about how to run Jira automations, how to create new spaces, or even more complex things and processes like how to implement fully automated onboarding in Jira. And the interesting part about Jira for executives is that they don't care about any of that. They don't care about how to run automations. They don't really care about creating new Jira spaces and projects. They don't really care about how onboarding is actually done. What they usually care about is the outcome of that. So they care about whether work is being done, whether goals are being hit, and whether reporting is simple and accurate. So it's kind of flipping a lot of what I usually talk about and talking about it from a different perspective. Because a lot of times when we jump in and start to build things, when I jump in and start to build things, there's sort of two different groups of people that want something different out of Jira. The group that is the Jira users or the Jira admins, they need to be able to work. And the group that is the Jira executives, they need to be able to see outcomes. So it's a little bit of a different perspective on how I'm going to be talking about a few things here. And if you're an executive, this webinar is essentially directly for you. I'm creating this webinar. I'm going to be talking about specifically to executives. But if you're not an executive, I encourage you to stick around because you'll probably have a slightly different perspective shift in understanding of how executives expect to see Jira, how executives expect to use Jira, and sort of what they want out of it. So hopefully that makes sense, and it'll kind of give you another perspective and give you a new way of looking at Jira in general. So as we jump in, I want to run a first quick poll. So this poll is going to be, can you tell me exactly what every single person in your company is working on today? So that should be popping up right in front of you. All you need to do is hit yes or no. So I'm going to go ahead and hit no because I would say I know most, maybe not all. So I'm going to say most, and looks like trend is showing me that 90% of you are saying no, and 3 of you, 11%, said yes. I'd love to see the 3 of you. What does your Jira environment look like? What kind of reporting are you doing? Or maybe you have a really small team, so it's a lot easier to track. But really, at the core of the problem, that's what we're going to be trying to solve today. As executives, you're probably wanting to know or wanting to see and wanting to understand what exactly is being done today, who's working on what, if there's any blockers, any problems that need to be solved or fixed before something major may happen. So thanks all for participating in that poll. I really want to talk about 2 different categories today. I'm going to kind of break this into 2 different sections, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But really, those 2 sections are going to boil down into the executive and the team. And these are, again, the 2 different perspectives of working and using Jira. And I want to use an analogy sort of a car, essentially. And I'm going to use the analogy of a dashboard or the gauge cluster and then the engine. So the team is the engine. The team is the what's doing the work, is what's actually powering the car, what's actually powering the dashboard of the gauge cluster. And the executive is sort of the actual gauge cluster where you see the speed of the car, how fast it's going, how much fuel you may have left, any potential warning signs like your check engine light, right? You have all of that in front of you, available for you, ready for you to utilize and consume that information to be able to make better decisions on what to do next. So you have the dashboard or the gauge cluster or the executive, and then you have the engine or the team that's actually powering the vehicle, but also powering the dashboard. And super critical here, a lot of time, and if you get nothing else from this webinar, I want you to walk away with this. A lot of times, us as executives, myself included, we will try to add more gauges to our dashboard. We'll try to add more metrics, try to add more information, try to see more, have it be more relevant to be able to make better decisions. But the problem with adding more metrics, information, gauges is that sometimes the engine just does not support it. So if we're trying to add a check engine light or like a tire pressure sensor light or whatever it is, and our engine or our vehicle doesn't support that, doesn't matter how many of them you add, it won't be anything relevant that you would need to see. And a very simple example of this in work management or in Jira is going to be, let's say if you're breaking down a dashboard and viewing, let's say you're looking at capacity, who's working on what and how much capacity they have. So that could be a phenomenal report for an executive. But if your team, or if you're not tracking work items and you're not assigning work items, that information is irrelevant because your actual engine is not supporting that information on the back end, or like at its core, it's not supporting the information that you would be able to get to make relevant, good decisions as an executive. So if you get anything out of this webinar, make sure that you are not just throwing together metrics and reports and looking at a gauge cluster or a dashboard, but you're actually understanding and knowing that that information is supported from the tool that you're using. So that's the most important thing here, and the kind of the perspective shift I wanted to put in your minds as we move forward. And so I'm going to be talking about very tactically how the executive piece is going to work, things to put together for dashboards, tools I like to use personally, and then we'll go into the team. And the team is going to be a little bit more tactical in terms of how do we set up Jira, how do we standardize, how do we think about actually doing work in Jira as we're our team is jumping in doing things in Jira, so on and so forth. So that's kind of going to be the agenda for today. And if you don't know who I am Josh, the CEO and founder of Grid.io. We've worked with companies that you see on the screen. We have a team of about 10, so I'm super excited to be talking about Jira for executives because I guess in a way I am an executive, and I have a team of about 10, and I'm going to show you actual dashboards I use on a daily basis. I'm going to show you exactly how I set up and standardize work to be able to easily report on that within our own Jira environment. We have roughly 30 to 40 Jira spaces or Jira projects right now, which is roughly the average. When we jump in and work with clients, we're typically looking at between 10 and 100. So we're right at the middle mark there. So I want to share a few things that I like to do personally as someone who's used Jira for years and years now, who works with a lot of teams to implement Jira, make Jira better, and what we do internally ourselves to actually make Jira relevant for executives. So hopefully that makes sense. A couple of things right before we jump in is that yes, we're recording. I already saw this question pop up in the chat, but we will send this out right afterwards. You can share this with your team, share this with your executives, share this with your CEO, watch it for later, save it for later. We will be sharing this, so don't worry. We'll send this out right after today's webinar. And a couple of participation items. You already found the chat. I'm sure most of you are in there. And so feel free to drop any chats, comments, anything in there. And then if you have questions, please drop them in the questions tab. And then in the questions tab, you could also upvote relevant things that you want answered. And at the end, I'm going to do my best to answer every single question that comes in. So at any point during this webinar, if you have something that you wanted me to dive deeper into, maybe a more specific scenario you wanted me to cover, any recommendations I might have, anything that comes to mind, drop it in the questions tab, because I could almost promise you that someone else is probably going to have a similar question to yours. So it does really, really help for other people to kind of get a little bit more context. It also helps me out to kind of dive into topics that are going to be more relevant to all of you in particular. So questions tab, drop them in there, upvote them. And then polls, we already ran one, but you could check out the polls tab. We'll be running one more a little bit later. But other than that, let's go ahead and jump into our part one, which is Jira for the executive. So I'm going to be jumping into very tactical things in just a moment, but I want to cover why this matters first. And as executives, myself included, things that I want to see, and I have a little list here, are I want to know what's happening. I want to know who's doing what. I want to be able to spot issues, spot problems before they become major fires. I want to be able to stay focused and work on the highest value work first, including my team. I want to keep customers happy. I want to do more with the same headcount. So pretty much be able to leverage more from my team, and then be able to see the business sometimes on mobile, on the go, without actually being on my computer. And I'll cover that very specifically as well. But those are like the highest level things, the most common things that I've found that executives are very, very keen on seeing when they're talking about work management. And probably the biggest thing when it comes to this part one for Jira executives is that the biggest issue I see is that most executives don't use Jira at all. And depending on their role, oftentimes the alternative is they might Slack someone, they might send an email, they might call them, text message, or even a quick meeting, which usually aren't very quick. Those things are the alternatives here, right? Because they don't have the information that they would normally have to be able to see what's happening using like a dashboard, maybe a plans view, which we'll be covering in a moment. But the biggest problem that I see is that executives just don't use these tools. And part of the problem there is that as executives, maybe we don't have the right information available to us to be able to see the relevant things that we should see. That's partly why we run daily stand-ups. That's partly why we send, weekly reports or daily reports, when all of that information should be available in our work tracking tool. And I'll be covering exactly how to do that in Jira. And the part of why this is not ideal is that it also costs more, right? So to jump on a call with someone, to have them take the time out of their day to report on something that they're already doing or already tracking in their work management tool takes more time, and it costs the company more. So it makes no logical sense to do this when we could set something up that just tells us that information without doing anything extra or anything more on top of what's currently being done. It also feels a little bit like micromanagement, right? If you're asking for reports or slacking someone for specific information. And I totally get it. I do this all the time, super guilty of it. I'm sure my team will tell you that I do that all the time. Sometimes I'm like, I don't want to do this in Jira. You go do it for me. I'm super guilty of that and trying to work on it. But the goal is to make things frictionless, make things easy, make things simple, and make it available to us as executives to be able to see things at our fingertips. All right, so one kind of main thing that I'll talk about a little bit later are shadow systems, but I want to jump in and show you very practical things that we can do to build and to utilize in Jira to be able to show us what we need to see. So I'll share the first thing here that I have is my completed sort of Jira dashboard, and this is from our marketing team. This is the actual one that we use, or that I personally use on a very regular basis. So the first thing that you'll notice here is that I don't have 100 gadgets, and the reason for that is that the reporting isn't really about how much information you can see. The reporting is about seeing the information that matters, that's actually going to inspire change. So my default metric for this is if the metric will not inspire change, we do not track it. So for example, if you have a metric that shows you, let's say total amount of customers, or a metric that shows you total amount of website visitors, whatever what metric you may be tracking, if the metric does not inspire you to change something or does not lead you to change something, you do not want to track it, because at that point it's just noise and it's not relevant. What we want to track as executives is the things that will actually inspire us to change something. So I'm keeping things very, very simple and high level. Obviously, you could get as complex or as simple as this as you want. As with everything else in Jira, I always lean towards the simpler side on things that actually matter. And we have a little breakdown by task assignee, a couple more of that in a list view, and then a priority breakdown. And then what I did is actually have a filtered view where I could filter down even deeper and apply all of these metrics, or apply this filter to all these metrics immediately. So for example, if I want to see something that's overdue or everything that's overdue, all I do is click that and boom, immediately my dashboard changes and shows me exactly what's overdue. I could take a look at the same thing that's due this week and boom, immediately our dashboards change. We don't have anything due this week, so nothing there. High priority, boom, immediately my dashboard changes and I see just the high priority items. So as an executive, I jump in here, I click one thing and boom, immediately I see everything that I want to see as an executive on a daily basis. And one thing that executives really like, and that I'll show you right here, is that these dashboards show up on your phone. So I use these from time to time where I show the same exact metrics. I could scroll through these, take a look at these, and I can see them directly on my phone at any given point in time. And what's great about this is that I can now go in, I have a very good idea, very good understanding of what's happening, what's overdue, what's stale, etc. But now I could drill into the data more if I wanted to. Oftentimes executives don't want to, but I now have the option to do so if I needed that capability. So I could go into specific assignees, I could click on specific work items, go into those work items, find out what's going on, have a little bit more information, see the subtasks, the information, all that kind of stuff is available to me. So this is probably the first thing, the most useful thing that you can use as an executive, and that is the dashboard. So I'll go over exactly how to set this up. And there's really kind of two ways you could go about this. The first one is kind of out-of-box Jira, which is all of your out-of-box gadgets, which are a little bit more basic. And I'll pull up and show you exactly what that looks like. But all we need to do is go over to our dashboard section, click the plus icon next to it, give this a name. So I'll call this executive, and then we click save. So now we have our brand new dashboard, and these are pretty much all gadgets that we have out of box. I have some rich filters in here, which I'll cover in a little bit. And you are more limited with dashboard gadgets that Jira provides to you. which I'll show you an option that gives you way, way more data. But if you don't want to pay for or use external plugins for this, you can absolutely do this in Jira natively. It's just going to be a touch more limited. So for example, I'm going to search for a pie chart. I'm going to add this pie chart, and then I'm going to break this down and select a filter. Let's see if I have one for, I think it was for mobile. Should have a mobile filter. There we go. And then I'm just going to break this down by assignee. Very simple, very straightforward. Pulling up a project, and I can see all of my work items are unassigned. So right there, we just created our first simple visualized report. We broke things down by assignee of a specific project, space, or maybe even multiple projects or spaces. So that's pretty much it. You go through and you find the gadgets that you want. Pie chart is probably one of the more flexible gadgets that you can get, but you could scroll through here and kind of find what you would essentially utilize, like list views. You can do, sprint counts, filter counts are fairly powerful. If you're adding anything, I would go with the pie chart and the filter counts. Those are probably the most powerful out of box. You also have filter results, which is kind of just a list of work items. And what a dashboard does is essentially bundles all of these metrics into one place for easy viewing. You can sort of set these up as filters or even go to reporting on a project level. But the problem there is that you're a little bit more limited with what you can see and what you could bundle. And this gives you the ability to be a lot more flexible and see things in one place very, very easily. So that's kind of how you get started and set up a few different metrics out of box. And yes, these are a little bit more limited, unfortunately. So I have a couple of recommendations if you are doing this. The first one is going to be rich filters. And this is going to be the plugin that I pretty much use for all reporting needs. I have zero affiliation with them. I know some of the guys at Rich Filters, but frankly, I know a few of the people at other reporting tools a little bit better. This is still the one I opt for because it's just so good. And it was essentially what I showed you on my marketing dashboard here, where you can have your pie charts, your bar charts, your list views, breakdown by filters, and a whole bunch more. And it's also fairly simple to use. It does maybe take a day to get used to, but once you've got it, once you're familiar, you could pretty much report on anything you could ever want using this tool without like being a super technical individual with like development background and all that. So rich filters is my first recommendation. I also wanted to shout out Tempo, because if you're doing any kind of time tracking, financial planning, capacity planning, Tempo is going to be your go-to. So whenever it comes to using or pulling information out of Jira, really the two big things that you may need that are third-party extensions are a reporting plugin and a time tracking plugin. And this time tracking plugin, I'm kind of bundling with a lot of other stuff, but we use Tempo internally all the time to not only track time and report on it, but you could also do really phenomenal capacity planning with it. So that's one piece that is very, very important for a lot of teams. Also financial tracking. So you could see how much a project costs you versus how much a project is being spent on, especially if you're using billable hours and things of that nature. This is like super vital information that Tempo helps you connect. And it's essentially using the default time tracking in Jira. It does give you a little bit more advanced capabilities in Tempo, but it's just pulling that information and giving you a way to organize projects, organize teams, organize billable hours, and even be able to integrate that with your actual accounting tools. So super valuable, super great. We use this all the time. Every team that I work with that needs more advanced time tracking, this is always the go-to recommendation. And frankly, I think this is like the only good option for time tracking in Jira. There are a few others, but unfortunately, this is like the only really, really good one that gives you all the options you could ever want. So the big things, again, are going to be using reporting and dashboards in Jira. And then I also want to shout out plans views, because plans views are a little bit more nitty gritty, but they are still quite high levels. Real quick, I know this looks like a lot. And if you'd rather just have me and my team help implement exactly what I'm showing you in this video, that is exactly what we do. We're currently opening up 4 more slots for our Jira strategy. We only run 4 of these per month. If you're interested, hit the first link in the description below. So a plans view essentially combines either multiple projects or a single project and gives you sort of a timeline view with some other information on where things are at. So if you wanted to track an initiative, where things are on a very high level, you could also drill into data here, like if you wanted to in particular, and then see like actual tasks and subtasks, which makes it really easy for drilling into that data. But if you didn't want to, you didn't have to. So you could see all of this information really easily at your fingertips. For example, if you have a big project running, where are we within that project? what is completed within that project. We use this religiously at grid.io. And what's really great about these is that it rolls up time and it rolls up fields. So really good example of this is, let's say if you do time tracking and you're tracking time on subtasks, so you're tracking times on stories or bugs or tasks, and you want to roll that up into an epic. Plans Views does this for you automatically without needing to run any automations, without doing anything more complex. So it's a really, really great view to like get a very high level idea. And this is a lot of times used by like PMOs, director levels, maybe not as much C-suite. But if you wanted to share this with your C-suite, it is pretty valuable and really great to like actually see this information, add more fields, context, and see like a very simple, easy to view timeline. You could even stretch this across years, months, quarters, weeks, whatever else. This is a super valuable tool. And pretty much to create these, all you need to do is same as dashboards, create a new plan, give your plan a name, and then you'll want to add work to your plan. So you can do this by board, by space, or by filter. I typically would do this by the space and then just add whatever spaces I'd like. So if I'm adding like my design project, and then adding more work, another space, my IT operations project, add all the projects that you want to see, this maybe all of them. And then once you have all of them lined up, you could see them in one plans view in one place rather than jumping between projects, being able to dive into certain epics, information. You see it all in one high level view, which is super critical for a lot of executives since they don't often like to jump around between a ton of different projects. So those are the high level tools that I would recommend using almost every single time for executives. My default here, dashboards. I use them daily. Every executive I know that uses Jira on a very high level and very tactically uses dashboards daily. And plans views are a sometimes, but depending on job role, if you wanted, and you could also include like timeline views in dashboards. So that's something that I often see executives do. But if you wanted a little bit more in-depth information, actually being able to drill into that information, using the actual plans view and sharing that with executives, looking at them as executives is super valuable as well. So those are the high level tools that I like to recommend for reporting, dashboards, and how to sort of get started with them. If you're an executive, you're probably not building these out on your own. So I'm not going to go into the tactical of like how to do all the filters and pull in all of these reports. I did want to do a super high level overview of that, but I am assuming as executives, you probably have someone on your team that's already doing this for you. You just need to be able to kind of communicate with them and tell them what you want to see and how you want to see it. So hopefully that makes sense. And yes, there's a comment in here that unfortunately you do have to be on Jira Premium to use plans at all, not even effectively. But the alternative here is dashboards with a plugin, which can give you almost what plans gives you, maybe not quite as a seamless view or seamless way of working, but it is fairly close and a really good option to check out if you didn't want to like upgrade to a premium version of Jira. All right, so those are sort of our ways of tracking general information as executives. And the next piece is going to be, how do we actually understand this information, whether that's on our dashboard, whether that's on our plans views, how does it actually impact our company? And this brings me to goals like company goals, KPIs, OKRs, and things of that nature. So a lot of times with companies, it's tracked one of two ways for the most part. The first way is going to be executives love to track goals sort of in the back of their minds, like, oh yeah, we're trying to hit this, we're trying to do this, but it's not documented anywhere. And that is very unfortunate. I'll explain why in just a moment. Or option two is that their goals are tracked, but they're not tracked within the work management tool. So if you're using Jira, the goals might be tracked on a Google Doc, or they might be tracked on a spreadsheet, or they might be tracked somewhere else entirely. And again, that is a shame because goal tracking is something that is available in Jira, and it is very easily tied directly into Jira work items. And I'll explain exactly why this benefits the team so much and how it creates a lot of leverage later on in the team section. But I do want to cover that you can actually track goals in Jira very simply. All you have to do is head over to your goals tab on the left side. This is free. It's included with every Jira plan. So if you're not using this, you're absolutely missing out. It's a very easy and simple way of tracking goals. And it makes it fairly straightforward for you to drop things in there and track them. So I'll show a couple of examples and then build a goal real time. But essentially, we could have these like OKR or KPI frameworks where you have, let's say, an objective and a couple of key results. This is a general layout that a lot of different companies follow. And these goals are very simple and straightforward. You essentially have a goal name. What is the goal itself? A description of the goal. You could drop comments, And then this is sort of where the updates are done on the goal to make sure that things are on track, things are on pace, going to be completed on time and at a specific date. And then you have some general information. This is very similar to Jira layout as well, just a little bit more simple for like executives to be able to not get a ton of information, just the high level information that's needed. So you see the progress, you see like the teams that are contributing, and then the sub goals that account or like roll up into this goal. And what we could do from these is actually link work directly to Jira. And what's beneficial about doing this is that, let me open up a quick work item where a goal is linked. And if I'm an individual who is working in Jira on a daily basis, and I am, a developer, whoever else, a manager, let's say you're a marketing director, a marketing individual, anyone in the company that is working on this task can now see which goals this lines up to. So you directly see, okay, this is my AI-driven sales transformation project. Here's the actual goal that this impacts. This one has a few links to it, but you could see the clear correlation. You could jump into the goal, directly integrated. You can see what this goal is about, who's the owner of the goal, the progress, and everything else. And again, I'll cover this more in depth in the team section. But essentially, all you need to do to build a goal is go to your goals directory, click create goal. You add in a goal name, like let's say hit 1 million in revenue in, 2025. And then you select a target date. You can do this by day, month, or quarter. I'll do 2025. I'll do Q4 of 2025. Click create, and boom, our goal is done. It's that simple. You have your goal created, and now you could add your updates, your information, your context, and actually link work items to this goal, which makes it super easy and super simple to track your goals inside of the Atlassian ecosystem or the Atlassian space, and then relate these goals directly to Jira, which then your team ends up working on. So you can easily update your goals here. You could have your team update them. And then all you have to do is jump in, look at it, make sure if things are on track, if things are at risk or off track, you could easily jump in here and make sure that whatever needs to be done is done to keep all of these items on track. So goals are super duper powerful, and they are fairly new. They've been going through some changes in the past couple of years. There are a couple of things that aren't phenomenal about goals, but usually this is a better solution than using a spreadsheet or a Google Doc anyway. And you have the benefit of integrating this with Jira, with Confluence, and all of your other Atlassian tools. So tracking goals and being able to look at dashboards and high-level reporting is probably the most critical thing as an executive that you would want to see, because you want to see what is at a very high level, the work that is being done, which was the dashboards that we covered, and then what at a very high level does that work actually impact in terms of business outcomes. So business outcomes are going to be your goals. What are your goals? What are your OKRs? Even tracking KPIs in here. And then the work that was being done and it contributes to those goals. As executives, that's pretty much everything you care about. And probably 90% of the time where you'll live within Jira is a dashboard and the goals page. That's pretty much it. So hopefully that covers enough of how I like to use Jira and how I've seen a lot of other executives use Jira in sort of the positioning and like the way that I like to set these things up. So that's sort of the entire part of Jira for the executive. The next piece is the Jira for the team. And the reason I'm talking about Jira for the team is that these executive dashboards, as I mentioned, only work if the underlying system is built to support them. So you can add whatever metrics you want. You could add whatever gadgets you want, whatever information you want to show. But again, if the information in the underlying Jira environment and project does not support them, it makes those metrics irrelevant. And what happens is we set up these fancy dashboards, this fancy information. Maybe some of it's relevant, maybe some of it's not. But even the relevant data, if it's inaccurate, it becomes irrelevant. So we want to make sure that we set up and approach Jira the correct way so that our teams are using our work management tools in the right way for us to be able to see what's happening very easily, very quickly, and for us to be able to get more leverage from our team. So actually be able to get more output from the same team that we currently have. And that'll be kind of my point too, but this matters a lot because we need to be able to have clean, formatted, simple data that rolls up into these dashboards. And I'll show you exactly what we do at grid.io. This is probably the cleanest way I've ever seen it done. This is my demo environment, but I'll go over exactly how we set this up. I wish I could show you our environment, but I think we have some client information in there that might pop up, but let me take a quick look because it would be really interesting to show exactly what our environment looks like. But essentially, the first thing that we need to make sure is that we are using clean information that is very, very simple and easy to share across different projects. And the reason I say this, yeah, I can't really share my environment, unfortunately, but I will show you on this demo environment exactly what I'm talking about. So let's say you have 10 different projects. You have 10 different projects in Jira, and every single project is going to use a different priority standard. So project one is using severity 1 through severity 4. Project 2 is using priority 1 through priority 4. Project 3 is using high, medium, low. Project 5 is using red, green, blue, whatever else you want. And all of these different projects have their own way of tracking, let's say in particular, a priority level. The report that I showed earlier for our marketing team, let's say we're doing this report on multiple, yeah, let me share my screen. Sorry about that. The report that we're actually running on multiple, and I'll pull up the permission schemes. The report that we were running, let's say for a marketing team or a development team, these can be shared by multiple different companies. Or sorry, that's priority. Let me pull up the priorities. There we go. So we have a lot of different priorities that can be used in Jira. And the cleanest way of doing this is to make sure your entire company, if possible, uses the same priority scheme. And again, if, as I mentioned, if you're using like, critical through informational, and then another one is severity 0 to severity 4, and then another one is high, medium, low, and then another one is red, green, blue. To be able to report on that information across 5 different priority schemes with 5 different priority types is going to be a real challenge. It is possible. It is not very easy to do. And oftentimes you're going to be missing information, especially if you're still creating new different types of priority schemes. So the best solution for this is to use one unified default priority scheme for the entire company. Again, this may not be possible for you because sometimes engineering teams have their own way of using priorities, and they may not want to change that, or like it's for a very specific reason, or maybe it integrates with a couple of their alerting tools, and like severity 0 is just required versus the other teams, they need like a high, medium, low, something a little bit simpler. That being said, as many teams as you can consolidate using this priority example, you should be doing. Another really common example is workflows. So in here, we have a ton of different workflows as examples with like IT operations, IT support. All of these have their own unique workflows. And the way that we run this within our own Jira environment is we have 2 separate workflows. We have one workflow that that is used for all internal projects, things like marketing, sales, executive boards, all that. All of those use just one workflow, no more. And then we have one for client projects, which is a little bit different, but all of the client projects that we have also follow the same exact workflow. And bringing up a very specific example of using these client projects for reporting, or like, let's say I'm going to use a development team as an example. If I have 10 development teams using different workflows, how am I supposed to know what's in progress when one team uses in progress, another team uses in development? If you're reporting on the in progress status, you're missing all of the information and context from the other team. And it makes it that much harder to actually report on your data. So the main thing to take home here is that essentially you want clean, consistent data across your entire organization, entire Jira environment, and that's when Jira actually becomes predictable. And based on like what we set up here on the back end with our infrastructure, with our teams actually using Jira, that gives us the leverage to actually report on these items. I'll bring this example up a little bit later, but one that's like in my head is still the team that we worked with Arcadia. When I came in to work with them, they had 50 development teams. I think their team company was like 1,000 people. They had 50 different development teams. Every single one of those teams used a different workflow. So all of them had slightly unique variations, name changes within their workflow statuses. And the whole goal of coming into that project was leadership wanted reporting. Like that was the primary goal. They wanted to see what's happening, where, and when. That was the goal of actually going into Arcadia and giving them useful reports. When we put some of those reports together, we immediately realized that, yeah, this is not going to give us any information until we standardize information across these teams. And when you start to standardize, not only does reporting become effective and you could actually run that reporting, make real business decisions based on that, but the teams also become aligned. The teams become aligned, and if one reporter goes into, or sorry, if one developer goes into another team, it's exactly the same workflow. It's exactly the same. It's easier to communicate. It's easier to work together. It's easier to run sprints together. It becomes a lot easier, and your team has immediately more leverage as a byproduct of standardizing. So hopefully that makes sense, but workflows is probably the biggest thing I would start with. Priorities is another big one, as I mentioned. Screens and fields are a little bit less relevant, but still pretty relevant. And then permissions is another really big one. So as I mentioned internally at grid.io, we kind of have two different project types: client facing, which is like work we do with clients. And then we have our internal projects, which is everything internal. And we pretty much split everything up into two different buckets. Priorities are always the same, but when it comes to workflows, permissions, screens, fields, all of that is shared by all of those projects. I think we have like 20 or 30 client-facing projects. And then all of those are shared. And then we have just one more. So we have in total 2 workflows that we use for our entire company with 30 different projects. We have a total of 2 different permission schemes that we use for the entire organization. And we have only 1 permission scheme. And that is ideal. The less you have, the better. So you want to do your best to make sure you're consolidating, having clean information that you're actually using within Jira. And one more point is that oftentimes you want to collect more information and like add requirements into your team, the information that's collected from them when they actually go to do their work. So one classic example, as I mentioned, was requiring an assignee. And my caution here would be, we can require a ton of stuff in Jira. We could require every field under the sun that you have, but I would highly recommend that you do not. Because once you start adding a lot of requirements, a lot of corporate bureaucracy, things into your environment that make it really, really challenging and difficult for your team to do the work, it becomes really, really hard and really difficult for your team to enjoy the process that was built. So only add requirements that are absolutely necessary and that will drive real impact, that inspires change from the reports that you're pulling together. So keep that in mind. And one other line that I like to use is that people don't hate process, people hate bad process. So if they understand, like, okay, we need this information because these reports are used which impact these goals in our company, they will understand that and they will be supportive of that. But if you're just coming in and saying, hey, we need to require this information because we need it, and that's it, the teams are just going to feel like they're being micromanaged, right? So you want to be able to communicate, share why these things are required, what the goals are, what the company reasons are. So it makes it a lot easier for your team to actually buy into the values that you have. So standardizing is probably the biggest piece here, making sure that you're using clean information and making sure that every single team that works in your Jira environment works kind of similarly in a way. Again, we sometimes have different ways of working, different workflows, which is totally fine and acceptable. But where we can, we want to standardize and use the same information. And if every team works differently, you cannot scale. Like that is just a bare line minimum rule. If you cannot work, if you do not understand how your teams work, and if your teams all work entirely differently in their own worlds, how do you expect to scale that team? You cannot run a company with like 10 versions of the truth, which is essentially what happens. So hopefully that makes sense. I covered like the big ones: workflows, priorities, and permissions. Fields and screens are fairly common. I wouldn't say they're absolutely required. If you can, standardize those, but they get very difficult to standardize. So do what you can and start with your workflows for sure. And then the last point here with the team is Jira for the team is that we want to be able to add leverage as executives from our team. There's a lot of ways we could do this lately with AI, automation, all that. There's a lot of ways we can leverage and be able to get more from the current team that we have without necessarily adding headcount. All the things that I talked about so far are, as a byproduct, going to increase your team leverage. So if you have a dashboard that shows you exactly what everybody's working on, and you see that someone's working on something that probably doesn't matter in this current moment, or maybe was deprioritized, you can help direct your team and be able to get more out of the team output than you did before. So immediately we are able to, as a byproduct, get more out of our team by seeing what's going on, seeing what's happening, having everything tied into goals. So I actually did a whole goals webinar a few weeks back. And when I was doing that, I was putting together some research on how goals impact the actual company and employees at the company. And there are like really, really shocking stats that came up during that whole the whole process, was that when team members, when your team, when the people doing the work in your company are aligned on the goals, they are like far more effective, efficient, and produce way more than those who are not. So if you take like, let's say, two groups of people, and one group is the group that mindlessly works and just has a couple of tasks that they're doing and that's their day, versus the group that has tasks and knows exactly what impact that has to the company goals, you can immediately imagine that like the people who know what this is working towards, whether that's a new product release or something new that's being built in a company, a new some kind of a big goal in terms of revenue, if they know what impact that work has, they're going to be more motivated to hit those goals. And I see so many teams like jumping in and or so many executives jumping in and they're like, oh, that the goals don't really matter for the team. It's more of just an executive thing. But I do really encourage you to use goals for the team directly because it has a massive, massive impact for your team and the leverage that you can get out of your team. Even with the things that you might change for like requiring information, collecting information, reporting on it, they will have a deeper understanding of why that is happening and what that impacts the company. Very how their work actually impacts the company when you're making those different changes, and they can actually support you through that process. Real quick, if you're running a 10 to 200 person team and you're trying to set this up by yourself, the hardest part really isn't the configuration. It's getting your team to actually use what you built. After implementing Jira over 200 times myself, that's the pattern that I see every single time. Someone builds it out, the end users end up ignoring it, and 6 months later, you're trying to figure out what went wrong and how to fix it. And the mistake most end up making is that they configure the tool first and hope that the team adapts. We actually do the opposite. We fix the underlying process first and then build Jira around it. That's why it ends up sticking. Because we're so hands-on, we operate on a wait list, and our next kickoffs are 4 to 6 weeks out. And if you want to implement Jira so that it actually gets utilized, click the first link in the description.